You may be seated again. And I'm going to invite Phil Holman. Where did he go?
So I appreciate everyone staying, and we're going to try to keep this moving. So this is Adam Smith, and his title is Senior Director of Innovation and Community Engagement with the Jewish Family Services, Metrowest. Say that a couple times. And so, I think you know that we held a little bit of a discussion prior with Fran from Worcester Area Mission Society. They're working closely with WAMS, the Jewish Services, and so we asked him to speak today, and hopefully we'll get all the answers out. The plan is for him to present, and then at the end, we'd like to not ask questions during his presentation. Aaron and I are gonna walk around with microphones. Anyone that has a question, we'll call for questions. So let's do that. Thank you for coming today.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It feels good. That's why, it's really why I come at all, just for the applause. I appreciate it. It's lovely to meet you all and to be with you on this Sunday morning. Thanks for staying for a bit after your service. So Adam Smith, Jewish Family Service, as Phil said, which I'm sure there's a couple of you heard, Jewish Family Service, interesting presentation on a Sunday morning following a church service. But for those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, we're one of 8 resettlement agencies in the Commonwealth, helping to welcome new arrivals to our community, either through refugee programs, immigration, humanitarian parolees, or the similar. Our agency, while our work is rooted in the Jewish community's value system, it's like Beth Israel Hospital. More than 50% of the families we work with are not in the Jewish community. Specifically, we interact with all different faiths and nationalities and different types of people. And the values that drive us to do the work are pretty universal, about welcoming the stranger, about treating a stranger as you would treat yourselves, and about enriching and supporting the most vulnerable within our community. So my role today is to share a little bit and to answer questions. Oh, sorry. I'm pretty loud though, right?
No, but it's broadcast. It won't go through the broadcast unless you go through the microphone.
That's fair. I will try to keep my movement and swaying to a minimum so the virtual audience can also appreciate. So what I have an opportunity to share with you all about this morning is what does it mean potentially for your community, for a faith community, to support one or maybe 2 families that are here and looking for support. Couple of clarifying points, and then I want to have a discussion together to the best that we can so that I can answer questions about practically what does it mean. So first of all, 90% of the families that we're helping to support, I'm sure you've heard a lot in the news, especially lately, are here in a legal and documented fashion. The different terms that you're here, refugee, asylum petitioners, migrants, immigrants, without getting deep into the specifics of what those mean, all of them are about what their path towards citizenship does or doesn't look like. For refugees, that's someone who's begun the process of seeking citizenship outside of the country through the UN High Commission, where they've sought refugee status when they're outside of the country, gone through a vetting process, been approved, received a travel date, and then enter the country as a refugee. As opposed to migrants who are coming into the country first, also in a documented legal fashion, and being awarded either temporary protected status or a humanitarian parolee. And a lot of those families are currently in shelter until they can get assistance to get out of shelter, often through the support of a volunteer organization. So those are the 2 different hemispheres. The refugee side of things coming in federally through the UN High Commission, and the migrant side of things. Other than the route towards citizenship, the support doesn't look dramatically different. In fact, even the communities that they're from aren't necessarily different. So the logistics and the language are really about their path towards citizenship and how they entered the country. There are certainly people here that have come through in an undocumented fashion, but for Jewish Family Service and the other 8 resettlement agencies within the Commonwealth, What we're really talking about are people who are here in a documented manner and who are looking for assistance. Now, with that said, as you might imagine, the shifting administration and the shifting landscape of priorities, regardless of where your political affiliation lies, has changed dramatically. And the refugee program funding that comes through the State Department has been halted, has been suspended. I have lots of personal feelings about that. I would need another moment at the microphone to get deeper into it, but I'll say that the people that are here in our community right now, life got a lot harder and a lot scarier over the past several months. And my agency, along with others, is saying, what can we do as a community to take care of and to support people that are here and to help them more fully enter into our society into a safe and sustainable way. So I know Phil, all right, so Phil said that he wants to do questions kind of at the end. All right, so I'm gonna, because usually here's where I would pause and make sure there aren't any questions. Can we do that, or do you want to wait till the end? What do you think?
I prefer to wait till the end, just so that we can, there's a lot of information that you're gonna give us, and then hopefully it'll answer a lot of the questions even before they're asked.
Fair enough, no problem, no problem. So Jewish Family Service works with three primary demographics or groups. We serve older adults, we work with people who are experiencing poverty, housing instability, and we work with immigrants, migrants, and refugees are the three areas of our work. So the piece that's most relevant, most important for us to talk about today is the what would it look like for this community to consider supporting one or two families who we would move out of emergency shelter and somewhere closer to your community, probably realistically a bit closer to Worcester because of public transportation access and job opportunities. But what supporting one or two families looks like pragmatically, there's a financial piece. There is, and the financial piece looks a little different than if I gave you this talk 3 or 4 months ago. Because if you're talking about supporting a refugee family, they're typically, before the administration came, would come and get about 3 months of financial service, and that's it on their own. So when you move them into an apartment, even if it's an affordable living opportunity, you can imagine the gap in between the amount of time that it takes them to find employment, get a steady income, is a heck of a lot longer than 3 months. So typically we would say to a congregation, this is the dollar amount that will help bridge that gap. But we're really not talking about refugees right now. We're talking about migrants who are here, who are experiencing the same need. The good news is in Massachusetts, the state side of the funding, at least for the time being, has a little bit more stability than the federal government is freezing, which means that there is financial support for housing. So it makes the financial lift for a congregation a little different. Where if it was supporting a refugee family, I would be saying to you, typically the cost is about $20,000 to get someone stable in 1 year. But on the migrant side of things, because home-based funding, which is a state Massachusetts-sponsored program, is still in play, it's a little bit less expensive. So there's a financial piece which can range. So I've had congregations say, we've been able to raise between $2,000 and $3,000, and we'll say, we'll take it. I've had congregations say, we can raise 20 or 30. Amazing, we'll take it. The truth is, no matter what is the amount of money the congregation is able to come up with, it is better than no support at all. And the big lift isn't the finance. The big lift is what it means to have a volunteer team that is going to welcome and surround a family as if you had a relative coming from out of town who didn't know anybody. The volunteer structure is about helping them get set up in an apartment, furnishing an apartment, finding them culturally appropriate meals, teaching them where to shop, getting them signed up for school, transportation to medical appointments. It are those type of volunteer structure that usually we say you need a team of roughly 10 to 14 people so that the burden on any individual person isn't too much, that you can kind of break up the work. Hey, these people are going to be available to provide rides to a doctor's appointment or to go shopping, something like that. This part of the team is going to help with English as a second language. This part of the team might help with job searching, filling out resumes, applications, things like that. So the volunteer structure, we say we want 10 to 14 people. And it's helpful if you have one or two team leaders who serves as kind of concierge or triage for that volunteer work. And you guys are blessed to already have a couple of people who step forward to say that they're excited and willing. So thank you very much for being willing to do that. It is a yay, for real. That's often the biggest barrier, is do you have one or two people who's willing to serve as the head of this volunteer structure? Then you need people who are willing to episodically volunteer. And then as a community, you think, what is a reasonable amount of funding that we think we can come up with in support of, say, one or two families? So that is the overarching structure. I will say this, the piece that isn't talked about a lot, we're talking right now about what does it mean for these families to receive support. It's often a couple with 2 or 3 kids. That's often the structure. But there's over 100 families in Massachusetts that are still in shelter right now with their young school-age children, hoping and waiting to be moved out of shelter. Their lives are super stressful, and they got a lot more stressful with so much unknown. I'm sure once Phil passes the microphone around, there'll be questions about the ever-changing number of executive orders. I have very few answers to what the future looks like because so much is changing so quickly. Last weekend, almost exactly at this time, there was a stop work order for any State Department program that's funded, not just no more refugees are coming in, but in fact anyone who's here, immediate stop funding, even to the 3 months that they were entitled to through the previous set of rules. And a ton of our social service agencies, politicians, school systems, individuals have gathered. I've been in more meetings in the last week, more emergency task force meetings. And then on Wednesday, that stop work order was rescinded because it was challenged as not legal. And the spirit remains, but it was rescinded. Nobody knows exactly what that means, truthfully. I'm sitting in meetings with politicians trying to unpack, what does it mean? What does it mean to try and be compliant and not swim against stream with the current administration, but to live our values and try to support people in a legal and appropriate way? And we're trying to sort that out. The families that are in shelter right now often have temporary protective status, or that is awarded at the president's discretion. So that temporary protective status could be removed, their work authorization could be removed. If we understand what the administration is sharing right now, what they're saying is that isn't the population that they want to start with or that they're going after intentionally. What they've said is, we're going after people who are here in an undocumented fashion and who've been involved in some type of crime. We hope that's the case. We don't know what the next series of weeks and months are going to look like. What we do know is that these families will have a much, much better shot at being successful and getting on a path to health and moving them out of such a vulnerable state if we get them out of shelter and into stable housing with a congregation or a community that is willing to pray with their feet and support them. So there's a lot I don't know. There's a lot I can tell you. The last thing I'll say before we turn it over to questions is most of the faith organizations, churches, mosques, synagogues that we work with will tell you when they're paired with a family that they believe that they get the better end of the deal. They say, yes, they're supporting a family, but they're becoming part of our community. And it is an incredibly powerful, rewarding, enriching experience for the faith community. There's a synagogue in Needham, and 2 weeks ago, a couple that came that they're supporting, they came here, they weren't married, they have one child, and while they're here, they chose to get married, not Jewish. And they said, we want to get married in the synagogue. And the rabbi said, okay, are you Jewish? And they said, no, we've seen like Adam Sandler movies, so, and you know, right, and they're like, well, I mean, that's not like our chosen representative exactly, but what the family said, kind of joking aside, was the couple said, this is where we feel like home. And this community and this congregation has become like home. It's where we feel safe, it's where we feel accepted. And so the rabbi served as justice of the peace and officiated at a very Jewish-looking wedding that didn't have some of the typical liturgy, but it's because they are part of the congregation. And it's about taking care of people regardless of what their belief system is. It's very cool. It's very cool, and it's exactly what is our wish and our hope. That's what we're aiming for. And, you know, my job this morning is to try to convince you a bit and to say, hey, this is something that our church could and should take on, and that it can be really rewarding, and that the cost structure can be within the parameters of what works for this congregation. And then we'd go about matching you with a family and moving someone out closer to here that's kind of geographically appropriate. What I mean is in terms of volunteering. It gets difficult if you're going to drive someone to doctor's appointments if they're physically too far away. That can be a challenge. I know I've said the last thing I'll say a couple of times. In fairness, my wife's clergy, so like I can adopt that like, and in closing. You know, it's been a very difficult few weeks for anyone in the social service space. But one of the real pieces of light that I've had the blessing to be a part of are faith communities and volunteer groups and schools coming out of the woodwork to say, we want to help. We want to help however we can, either in a bigger move in supporting a family, or by doing a drive, or by giving money, or by volunteer. People throughout the Commonwealth are coming forward to saying, this is a complicated moment in time. How do we help? And how do we help care for each other? And it feels really good, and I'm glad that I get to be part of that piece of it. So that's the spiel here. That's the overview for you all and all the people who are watching on Zoom. I'm sure it's hundreds. Maybe thousands. You don't know. No, but thank you guys very much for the time, and I'm happy to answer any questions and share a little bit more.
So, Adam, I
Please.
have a question to break the ice. How's that?
All right.
So when they put a stop order on paying all government grants, federal grants, we know that some of the faith communities that have been doing the work that you're doing, a lot of their funding is through some kind of a federal grant, and they said if we lose that money, it could be 30-40% of the revenue that we spend to support these families. How much of your support of the families is funded through a federal grant that's in jeopardy?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. Jewish Family Service of Metrowest is a fairly small resettlement agency compared to some of the other providers that are out there, whose entire work is focused exclusively on the refugee program. So for us at Jewish Family Service, our refugee department is going to be dramatically affected. For us, it's probably about $1 million of funding against $8 million budget that is at risk. We are working as hard as we can not to see any of the services we provide stop or even cut much shorter. We're counting on philanthropy and volunteerism to fill some of those gaps, and we're reorganizing where we can. But for us as an agency, we're lucky that we're in a stable position. So JFS as an agency isn't going anywhere. Some of my colleagues in other service agencies can't say the same thing. They're looking at significant downsizing. So the State Department, the delineation between funding that comes through the State Department, federal government, and that which is distributed through the Commonwealth, it's a blurry line because so much of the money that the state gives out is backed by federal giving as well. It's not exactly, but those circles, those Venn diagrams overlap in a significant way. And the truth that truly, we don't know what the next chapter looks like. We know that the refugee program is closed for the foreseeable future. And only 20% of asylum cases are approved right now, which is already difficult. But so much is emerging and evolving. Like even with Rubio stepping forward as a migrant himself who said he's supportive of these types of programs, we just don't know.
So we're going to ask for any questions, and raise your hand. We'll come around with a microphone. Why don't we start with Peter?
Hi. I believe you mentioned in terms of just geographic locations to likely help relocate family or families. Maybe an area closer to Worcester might be, well, I'm not sure. You said maybe more of the kind of target. You mentioned public transportation. You mentioned job opportunities. That may make sense. There may be other reasons, but I'm also curious if we were interested in trying to welcome a family or families closer, specifically geographically, to, say, Sterling, if we could support the transportation, maybe on down the road with a car, vehicles, et cetera, could this specific type of community be viable and desirable for a family that like these that we're talking about? Or are there other reasons that this might not be for them? If we could create that kind of welcome, could they be potentially happy and have everything they need here?
Yeah, I mean, there's like 3 or 4 important questions within there, but I'll start with just the compare and contrast between what the reality is, right? So in terms of what's optimal, of where they could go, anywhere out of shelter is quite a bit. That's kind of just to set the stage about what. Then the next big hurdle absolutely is all about transportation. So if you can help, so there's been congregations before that have had someone who's donated a car or loaned a car for a period of time, or have like a really robust ability, a bus system or help. There's no rule about any of this that says you have to live near public transportation, you have to be right on the outskirts of Worcester. It's where they're gonna get support and allow them to get onto their feet. I'll say another thing, which is housing. There's a housing crisis throughout the state. Nothing to do with the administration, just a housing crisis. The fact is, we have thousands more people who are looking for places to live than we have places for people to live. So sometimes when we're talking about addressing homelessness, pragmatically, we're not necessarily talking about solving it, we're talking about picking who's homeless, because it is a volume issue. Meaning, if we don't do more development or come up with creative solutions, and some of those creative solutions that are emerging right now look like accessory dwelling units, or people, if there's an older adult in the community that has an in-law apartment or a second or a separate entrance and says, hey, I would consider welcoming someone to live in my house. We've actually started exploring models where we pair an older adult with another older adult to combat social isolation and things like that. But we're just starting to explore what would it look like to move a migrant family into an older adult's house who has the space where we could train and pay the migrant families to do some light support for an older adult that needs it. All of that is a way of saying creative solutions around cars, around transportation, around someone who has space, someone who snowbirds, like, hey, I'm not gonna be in my house for 6 months. I'd be willing to have someone live there as long as someone's looking after it. There's always 3 components. There's a cost, there's volunteerism, and there's case management. So my agency will be involved in case management. It's not like we make the connection, good luck, thank you for serving this family. JFS will stay involved, but it's all about being creative. So that's the transportation. But so then the question is, it's easier to move, like if we moved a Haitian family to this community, it'd be easier to move two, where they can often support each other, especially if we're looking for employment for adults. If you can have 1 of 4 potential parents watching kids speak the same language, it's just a little easier culturally to have any connection to people that you're familiar with. So, thank you.
Another question? You got one from the internet?
From the internet?
Phil Potts is asking, do you need to recruit local lawyers to be available for legal assistance? Can you repeat that so that the online people?
looking to see if we need to recruit attorneys to be available. Yes. So I'd say the categories of support right now. JFS focuses most of our work on direct family support. But the work that is needed right now in general falls into, kind of loosely speaking, 4 categories. Advocacy, people who are actively working to change policy, things like the accessory dwelling units. Right now, faith organizations couldn't put a tiny home in any of their, on their property. It's not allowed, it's only residential. Have you heard of like not in my backyard? So there's legislation right now in the advocacy bucket about yes in God's backyard. It's an interest about people who are advocating and lobbying to allow churches and synagogues and the like to build space or to use space that they already have. But advocacy is one piece that we don't get directly involved in. We work with other advocacy organizations. Legal is a whole other category where we are absolutely looking to gather pro bono attorneys who are either willing to be available for detention hearings. It's really difficult. For affidavit programs, that's when there's a family, these are painful things to talk about, but when there's a family in our community that is potentially facing deportation to a sometimes unsafe part of the world, they might choose to try to leave their children here for them to be safer. And if that's the case, they need to fill out legal paperwork, affidavit paperwork, where we need a notary and an attorney to help with. And we are doing that in real time. It is really, really painful and really sad. And we need attorneys available to make legal advice. So MIRA and JALSA are both organizations that are helping to kind of collect names of attorneys who are willing to be involved. So there's advocacy, there's legal, there's direct family support, and then there's training and just kind of knowledge sharing. That's a lot of know your rights trainings. What does a warrant look like? Is if someone shows up at your congregation, what are the rules? What does the law say about, well, allowing them in? Because as you've probably heard, in 2016, churches, schools, and hospitals were kind of off the table in terms of ICE coming in. That is not the case anymore. It's all been labeled fair game. So there's a know your rights and the like training. JFS doesn't do that personally, but we help connect. So advocacy, legal, direct service, and training are all going on. And so for the Zoom person, yes, absolutely. If you have someone who has a legal background and is willing, please have them reach out to me and I'll direct them to the right place.
If our family needed legal help or they need mental health help or some other, is that available through Jewish Family Services, or would we be expected to find and pay for that?
It's thank you. It's a hybrid. I mean, that's why I mentioned there's always going to be a caseworker still involved, and it's kind of same thing with looking for employment. We have agencies we work with directly, but often it's something like, well, I saw these 3 jobs come up. One's at Holy Cross. Does anybody have a connection at Holy Cross? Like something like that, right? It's about So the burden is never going to fall on the congregation exclusively, especially not for medical services or mental health or something like that. It's always a conversation. But if there's tools that you have within the community, say, hey, we have 3 people who are mental health providers in our community. Let's start there. But it's always a conversation with the case manager. Oh yeah, wait, Phil, you gotta go. You can come stand up here if you want.
I want to make Aaron walk. So my question is about episodic volunteering. I know I have a very full and busy schedule, and I'm sure most of us here do. But what does episodic volunteering need to look like? Does it need to look like anything? Does it need to be a commitment of 1 day a week, or can it be more sporadic even than that?
Yes. I'd say the answer, yes. I'm sorry, I'm going to kind of look this way so the interwebs can still hear me. There's no right or wrong way, genuinely. And like, I should have started with the fact that while I give some version of this presentation to lots of communities, there's zero judgment about any choice that any organization makes in terms of being willing to help. From, I don't even want to say small or large, all of it's needed, all of it's helpful. But practically, that's why we say we want a team of somewhere between 10 and 14. Because some people are be like, well, I'm traveling for work for the next month, but I'm available on these 2 Tuesdays. The team leaders are the logisticians, like a WhatsApp message, hey, the family's looking to get to a doctor's appointment next week, anybody available on Thursday morning at 10 a.m., and then there's just response. Also, separate from what the congregation does, JFS is kind of far away, but anyone who wants to be a volunteer can be tomorrow. We have a fairly short vetting process. It's like Corey forms, things like that, because kids are involved. And then you'll get messages from we're like the safety net, right? Like, so if families don't have a community taking care of them, say, hey, episodically, who's available to do X, Y, and Z, and people sign up. But it's better when it's through a team. It's just faster and easier. But I would say, and then what we ask is the core team members are going to be vetted by my organization, just because want to be in compliance with what the state says. And then friendly helpers, friends, spouses, neighbors, they want to help. It's regular world. Like, they just go help. Nobody's policing specifically who is and who isn't vetted. What I'd say is, if someone hasn't been signed up as a formal volunteer, they shouldn't be one-to-one alone with any children. It's going to be the same rules as like school or youth group. But
So
the
Adam,
more the better.
Erin and I have had conversations about that, and she and I are going to be the head of the, responsible for the whole organization if we choose to do this, but we're going to get those 15 or so people through your vetting process, et cetera. But then we're expecting to have 30 to 50 more names of
Amazing.
people. And when there's a need, a specific need, tomorrow we need somebody to drive, we're going down that list, and we're going to find the people that are available, because everybody has personal schedules, they have work and all that. So there's going to be, our entire church runs that way. We try to get people in many, many points of entry, bigger commitments, smaller commitments. So that's exactly how we would run the program. We need the whole village.
Yeah, amazing. That's kind of best case. What you're describing is best case scenario.
People are sometimes reluctant to volunteer because they don't speak the language of the people who are coming. Can you tell us a little bit about whether they have any English language skills, and how we work with that?
Yeah, language is a challenging barrier, and it's real. Among the families, so within within JFS, we're kind of directly connected to about 40 families that are currently in shelter, and their stories range humongously in terms of language, training, education. I spoke to a Ukrainian family last week, and I was speaking to the mom, and she's like, yeah, like she has 2 advanced degrees. She's like an engineer. Versus there's a Haitian family that we're talking to, lovely young couple that aren't even, they're not even fully literate in their own language. Wide range of background and expertise, and what we would do in conversation, if you guys vote as a community to move forward, is we'll look together at some of the profiles of these families and say, this is who you could be in a position to support. I know from the really wonderful conversations I've already had, that you guys have a background volunteering through the Dominican Republic, and so I'd say we're looking for Haitian families likely, just to kind of be on theme. And yes, language, there's people who can speak Spanish, hugely helpful. Haitian Creole is challenging to find, but what?
There's a community in Leominster of Haitian Creole.
Oh, amazing. That's amazing. And I would say, like, what we've been helping families with a lot, I mean, I don't know how familiar the congregation is with AI tools, ChatGPT, even Google Translate. In the last 3 months, Google Translate, as like the whole front row's on their phones, I love it. No shade. I have the same, this is like my kids would be sitting right there and rolling his eyes at me. But what I'm saying is, what we all have in our pocket, the technology has changed in an alarming rate, So it used to be Google Translate's been around for a long time and pretty incredible, but now there's an AI version of it where you can set it on the table and you can say, the person I'm sitting across from speaks Spanish, I speak English. Everything you hear in English, say out loud in Spanish and vice versa. You set the phone down. It's slow. It's not as organic as this, but it's amazing. If you're in a conversation with someone, it is amazing. I'm not saying reading anything. I'm saying it is speaking it aloud. It's free. If you haven't had a chance, Google Translate conversation mode, and then the ChatGPT version that you have to pay for is even better. But there's lots of things we can teach people about.
So we have a question over here.
Yes.
But I think it might be just for Phil, I don't know.
Come on, Phil.
So if we really are considering housing a family or two, I haven't heard anybody talk about changing the bathrooms downstairs to accommodate, like there's building that has to go on, plumbing, all that stuff.
Oh, you mean here?
So we used to house IHN families before they became fixed site, and we were on a rotation. We'd take the families 2 weeks out of the year.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think at one time we were doing as many as 4 weeks a year.
Yeah, yeah.
They went fixed site, and that took all that away because it's a lot of work to transport these families 52 weeks a year around to all these churches. So we're pleased that they're now fixed site, and now we go there to volunteer. So there was a question raised recently about the possibility of accommodating a family in our basement, which is where we used to house the IHN families.
Yeah.
We have a couple bathrooms, but we don't have a shower. When the fixed site thing happened, the fire chief said to us, we really were very uncomfortable with you housing people in your church. And so we're going to assume that that's never going to happen again. He said, we accommodated you, we worked hard, we came over, we did the whole fire safety thing with the families every time we hosted. But he goes, it's really a bad idea. This church does not have sprinklers. Don't ask us to do that again.
Or like lead
Right.
certification for kids.
All that. So I don't think that that's the direction we'll consider. We do have a family in our congregation that has recently bought a home in Rhode Island and has a house, a 4-bedroom house that they're offering to us as long as we would pay, the cost of the mortgage. So, and it could be up to a year or more before we'd have to look for another space.
Wow.
So that's on the plate right now.
Wow.
So-
That isn't even what I was. That's amazing.
And they said they could move out in 30 days, so.
So we got a house, good for you.
So, I mean, and we haven't even really started talking to anyone else, but we've identified a house that's a 4 to 5, it could be 5 bedrooms, 2-bathroom house.
Wow.
So, we have a lot of discussions to have about what we can afford and all that, but we're already working that behind the scenes.
That's amazing. And if that fell through or didn't become a reality, what I started the alphabet soup of all the different programs can be a little exhausting, and I try hard not to get too into the weeds. But I mentioned home base funding. That is a Massachusetts-built program that will cover potentially up to 70% of the cost of rent for a year if we move someone effectively out of shelter. And what we believe from the state, from the Executive Office of Housing Authority in Massachusetts, is that we believe that funding is going to be stable for a year, which means we could find a 2-bedroom apartment somewhere within the community or adjacent, and the financial burden is significantly less.
So with that 5-bedroom house, we could accommodate 2 families.
Yeah, or I mean, if that ends up taking shape and being real, we have a refugee family it's a family of 8 right now that we're trying to figure out a more permanent solution.
I used that as an example in my previous presentation, that we were offered a family with 8 children.
No, 6 children.
Oh, okay.
So it's not quite
I thought it was 8 children and 2 adults.
8 children would be crazy.
Yeah.
6 children is just right. Right. It's a lot. The good news is they span in ages. There's I think high school down to preschool.
So out of respect for everybody's time, I'm
Yeah.
wondering if there are any more questions, and then, we want to wrap this up because we really appreciate everybody staying.
Yeah.
So are there any other really important questions that need to be asked? So that it's fair to say that just because you came here today doesn't mean this is the last time we can call on you to be here, right? So
Absolutely.
If we voted in favor on the 16th to do this, there's going to probably be a lot more questions, and we're going to need to have somebody come back
Absolutely.
and talk to us about it at that point. Obviously, there's training. When we send people to be vetted, do they have some small amount of training in addition to that as far as?
Yeah, but none of that has to be, it's not in person. A lot of it's can
Okay.
be sent electronically.
Virtual?
Yes, and
Yeah.
absolutely, I'll come back. My colleague who was supposed to be with me here this morning, her children got hit with norovirus, unfortunately, so she made the last minute call, and she said, well, I still think I might be able to make it. And I was like, oh, no, thank you. That sounds, no, please don't do that. But she's been doing immigrant support and work for 10 years, and she lives in Bolton. She's about 15 minutes away. So for either Sarah or I, for sure, it doesn't have to be like from the pulpit, like it could be in wherever. I'm happy to be involved and answer more questions.
So do we have any additional questions? If not, Adam, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
out. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.